So glad. Which? Oh.
Here we go.
I'm in.
Oh. Hello. Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. My name is Kimberly Hensle-Lowrance, and I am your host today. For those of you who are brand new to A Mighty Blaze, let me tell you a little bit about us. We are a volunteer effort of writers and creatives who love books, storytelling, authors, and bookstores. We work to bring attention to these essential parts of our culture during COVID-19 and beyond. Authors Love Bookstores is a weekly online program that I host and produce in conjunction with fellow writer Joe Moldover. Our goal is to highlight independent bookstores across the US and Canada, to tell you what makes them so special and what you can do to support their continued survival. We do this by speaking with booksellers and with the authors who love and appreciate their stores. If you're watching live with us on Facebook, feel free to post a question via a comment below the broadcast, and we will get to as many as we can later on. This interview will also be posted to YouTube, so please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze's YouTube channel so you can get notified as soon as it's online. We are so excited today. I am so excited today for our guests. I have long held the dream of going to Portland and visiting Powell's Books, so today is a little bit of bringing Powell's to all of us, and I have been a huge fan of our author, Karen Thompson Walker, for many years. So let me tell you a little bit about Karen. Karen is the author of the New York Times best-selling novel, The Age of Miracles, which has been translated into 27 or more languages and was named one of the best books of the year by People, O Magazine, the Financial Times, and many other outlets. The New York Times described it as, quote, a genuinely moving tale that mixes the real and the surreal, the ordinary and the extraordinary with impressive fluency and flair. Her second novel, The Dreamers, was named one of the best books of the year by Glamour, Real Simple, Good Housekeeping, and the list is very long. And it was named New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. Entertainment Weekly says it's a startling, beautiful portrait of a community in peril, and the New York Times Book Review called it powerful and moving. I loved both of these books and cannot wait to talk about them. Born and raised in San Diego, Karen is a graduate of UCLA and the Columbia MFA program. She lives with her family in Portland, where she is also an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Oregon. Welcome, Karen.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And then with us from Powell's City of Books, Bree Hogue, who is one of the managers there. She is a sales and events manager at the Burnside store. Is that correct? Okay, so yeah. People in Portland know what that means. I don't know what that means. Can you explain to our audience when I say Burnside what that means?
It's our flagship store that most people know about, our big, beautiful city block of books.
Hence the title, Powell's
City Books.
City Books.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. So I've never been to Portland, Oregon, but I have always thought of Powell's when I think of Portland, like the two sort of synonymous with the city. And so for our viewers today, Bree, who have not had the chance to visit your store, can you tell us a little bit about the store's history and why so many of us automatically think of Powell's and Portland together?
Yeah. Well, we know that Powell's is probably the second most visited man-made place in the state of Oregon, behind the Tillamook Cheese Factory, which beats us out because how can you turn down cheese and ice cream? But books are a third popular choice for visitors to the state of Oregon. And we are in our 49th year. Next year, 2021, we celebrate 50 years of business, still owned independently by the Powell's family. Back in 1971, Walker-Powell started this store here in Portland. It was up the street a few blocks. It was a very small one location. And he was inspired to open this store because his son had opened a store in Chicago and kind of got bit by bookseller fever himself, started this business, and then later convinced his son to move back to Portland and continue on with the business. And Walter and Michael Powell just very slowly moved into bigger and bigger building until they're in the location we are now in the, I believe, mid 80s, early 80s, and then slowly started taking over the block as other businesses went vacant. And then by the start of the early 2000s had built us up to 4 floors, 3 floors of product and gift and book product for customers to access.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that's why Powell's is known and very popular. We're the biggest bookstore on the West Coast. We sort of jockey back and forth with the Strand in New York City on who has more product. So does that make us the bigger store, or is it about how big we are? But it's a fun little rivalry that we maintain. And we're just proud of the work that we do. And all of our book selling and our customer service is really important to us. And we love talking about books with everyone who comes in the door.
How much of your customer base is the result of tourism or the result of people like Karen who are local? Do you have numbers on like the mix?
It's probably about even, and it depends on the season. So right now it's a busy season for us in December, basically through Thanksgiving through Christmas is very busy, and it's mostly local traffic doing their holiday shopping, but then out of town visitors in town with their family. So it's hard to pinpoint it because it's seasonal, and right now we're in a local season. But in the summer it's definitely tourism. So we suffered in that we shut down right around spring break here, and that is one of our busiest seasons. And then that just moved right into the summer, which is really busy for tourism. But overall, it's about even when you balance it out across the year. We have other locations in the neighborhoods, and so they see almost all of our neighborhood business. There's one on Hawthorne Boulevard and one in Beaverton, which is a suburb quite close to where we are now.
Okay. And so Karen, Powell's is your local bookstore, am I correct? This is where you go to shop?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I feel like I have strong feelings about and relationships to 2 Powell's locations, because one is the Powell City of Books, which is the icon I knew about before I moved to Portland, and was sort of even part of when I fantasize about moving to Portland. I came from New York. Powell's was in my map of Portland. I mean, my psychological, emotional map of Portland, one of the appealing things about the place, about the city. But then when I moved here, I discovered the Powell's location on Hawthorne. So then later we eventually bought a house that's within walking distance of that location. And I feel like we actually picked that house. Like part of when we were getting excited about this particular house was doing the Google estimate of how long the walk from our house to that Powell's on Hawthorne would be. And then, but I still also love to go to this, the bigger one downtown, the City of Books one, because it's just, I mean, it's like a museum of books. It's just an amazing celebration of books. So I sort of, both are very important to me. And then neither one is very far from where I live, but.
What makes Powell's so special? I mean, obviously the volume, the history, those sound like you could probably get any book you could ever think of there, it sounds like. But there's,
it feels like it.
But it has to be more than just the ability to buy a book. Well, there's something magical about bookstores. What is it about Powell's for you, Karen?
Well, for me, I think what I love about it, and what I hadn't maybe seen before, is it has the charm and the personality of a great independent bookstore, where you come, you feel like you're at a place, like a home for books, like a place that you want to spend time, and it's like an experience to spend time there, and you get the great individual recommendations, and that there's a lot of time and thought put into which books are recommended, all of that, and just the kind of style of a wood floor independent bookstore. It has all of that, but then combined with the vastness that you might otherwise associate with a big corporate store, or even just an online store. And obviously Powell's does have a great online store, but so that's a combination that I haven't seen before. I remember there was a really small bookstore where I grew up in Del Mar, California, when I was growing up. It was really small, really charming, but you couldn't walk in there and it was so small that you couldn't go in there knowing what you wanted to buy and come out with it necessarily, unless it came out, that week. It was more entirely curated. And so I just love that Powell's is both. Powell's is super curated, it has all these recommendations, but you can also walk in there with a specific title, even not that, even a somewhat obscure title, and you'll probably be able to walk out with it. And so it's just a very, I mean, as a reader and a writer, very exciting combination to have both of those things.
That's excellent. So Bree, what part of your job is to lead the book selling team at Powell's? So you're part of the sort of machine that makes all that magic happen. You're part of the team that goes around and hand selling books, which I just think that's like the best. Like what a way to spend your day, talking people into books. Probably not that hard to talk people in the bookstore into books if they're there to begin with. But what is it, do you think, that makes your team so skilled in being able to match books? Because if you have this huge volume of books, how is it that everyone can know what you have and to match it with your customers? What's the special sauce?
The special sauce is definitely conversation. And opening yourself up for those interactions with the customer, asking them questions, reading what sort of interaction they want, because there's a lot of people who come in here and they don't need any help. They know their section, they're going to go browse that, and they're going to get lost, and they want to find their way out of this city on their own. And so it's both in, our staff is so diverse and eclectic in what they read and what they're interested in. And we give them free rein to talk about that in any way that they want, and to make those recommendations in the way that feels best and natural to them. But really, we also just encourage them to ask questions and talk to the customers and find out what their experience is. And so, a lot of it is just them themselves getting used to this place. There have been times where a customer will ask me the most obscure science and technology question, and I will find out that we had a section for that I never knew about, and I'm just like, oh, we actually have a whole shelf of that weird, totally random thing you just asked about, and so it's both providing them with the tools to answer any question, and also just empowering them to make those decisions and have those conversations and figure it out. And again, they're so eclectic in what they read and what they're interested in, and sometimes they tend to gravitate towards the areas of the store that most matches their own expertise. And then we really focus on sharing with each other what we know and just talking about books constantly talking about books with each other.
Nice. That's a great way to spend the day.
Yes.
Karen, oh, go ahead, Bree.
I was going to say, every conversation here can start with, hey, what are you reading? Just to your coworker, and then you're off for hours with that person talking about what you're reading.
That's my favorite question. And that is actually a nice segue into my next question, which is, Karen, have you ever been at Powell's kind of uncertain what you wanted to read and been suggested a brand new book you had never thought of that you would want to recommend to our audience? That's a complicated question. I did that very long. But have you ever discovered an author at the store, or?
I mean, I've discovered all kinds of books that I walked in there not knowing I was, going to need to walk out with. I don't know if I have a great example of like that one thing that someone handed to me, but I mean, I always walk out. I go in there with like, I want to get that new book that I heard of, that I read about. And then I walk out with like 5 other books. That happens every time. So I don't know. I can recommend books in general, but I don't know if I have a great anecdote, especially because it's now that it's been, the Hawthorne store just reopened for browsing. And so I literally went there on the first day that it opened. And it was wonderful. But before that I had, 7 months of a gap when I wasn't able to do that, and I was missing it. So anyway, but
it is a wonderful feeling to be back in a bookstore, isn't it?
Yeah, I just love being in spending time in a bookstore. Pre-pandemic, and hopefully, post-pandemic, I do some of my writing in coffee shops, and I love to work in the one that's attached. Oh no, I forget what it's called. The coffee shop pot. That's the pandemic. That's because I haven't been able to go there.
There's a coffee shop at the Hawthorne store.
It's like attached, sort of, but it's anyway. I just love to. So I'll go and do work there, but then take a 5-minute break in my work, like the way that I spend my break is just browsing for 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the rest of the store. And it's just so nice to just something about the physical existence of all those books there, and to be able to pick one up and read a great sentence and then put it down again and go back to my own work is just really inspiring. So I've been missing, I would honestly say that Hawthorne on Powell's is really one of the main things after my kids' school. After that is Powell's, the things that I've been missing.
Yeah, I understand that.
Well, it's so funny because I was just going to say that I actually was introduced to Karen as a writer by being somebody else hand selling The Age of Miracles to me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Diana, one of our Blue Room booksellers. I just one day, it was late, we were getting towards close, and I said, I need something really good to read this weekend. And she was like, you have to read this book. And that's how I was introduced to Karen as a writer. And that's sort of the thing that is happening all the time here is people will just be like, I need something new. And then a bookseller will just pull up a book that they like and talk to them about it.
Oh, that's great to know.
Yeah. And it's like a treasure, isn't it? It feels like you're being given a secret.
Yes.
Here is this wonderful book that will take you away from life for hours. Yeah. I still remember where I was when I read The Age of Miracles. Like I remember that experience of reading that book, which I don't always remember that. And I felt that way with The Dreamers as well, that I mean, I'm going to give you my highest compliment, Karen, which is I always love books that kind of get in under your skin. Like after you turn the last page, you're still thinking about the book and you can conjure up that feeling afterward. And I felt that way with both of your books.
Oh, that's nice to know.
There's something about them. I think that they're just very special. So,
thank you. That's so nice to hear.
Well, it's true. And I know our audience will want to know if you're working on something else. And this has been an impossible year, so it feels like a terrible question to ask. But for those of us who are greedy readers, have you been able to write during the pandemic?
I mean, the spring was just a disaster on the writing front. I mean, was the least of our problems, obviously, but that was not a productive time for me. And I just think for the entire world, in a way, it was terrible and not productive. This summer, I feel like we had a bit of a reprieve, just like in my household, things were quieter and our kids were in summer camps and stuff. So then I actually did get a good amount of work done. So that was nice. But now I'm back to, as everything has gotten worse again, it just, I feel like the focus feels like very much on this larger, the way, like the thing that struck me about this is how this whole experience of the coronavirus is how this huge like news story is also affecting everyone, like every single really person on the planet and definitely every American in your daily life, anyway. So that's just something that's been on my mind. And so, just in terms of having less time, but also less mental energy, I feel like just keeping up with the news is sort of a drain. I mean, maybe as it should be on creative energy. So I can't say I'm making rapid progress at the moment. But, hopefully sometime soon. But I am working on a book. I'm about maybe about a third of the way into a new book. And I feel like it's hard. I'm a little superstitious about saying too much about it, but I could say it's another book that involves, it has like a sort of eerie otherworldly thing going on, but it's not exactly a disaster. I've written 2 books that are like big disaster stories, and this one is has a kind of different entrance point.
Excellent. I was thinking about The Dreamers lately because of the fact that that's a story about a pandemic. Kind of, there's basically a pandemic affects everyone. And for those who haven't read it, it's a pandemic where people fall asleep and don't wake up. And that's all I'm going to say, because you should just go read it if you haven't. But I wonder what that's like for you to have written a book about a pandemic and then to be living in one. It's probably not what you expected. Do you feel like, a bit of deja vu? Do you feel this is something you wish you didn't know very much about? How does that translate when you're
Yeah, I mean,
reality?
it has been very eerie, especially I mean, I think at the beginning it felt a little, just the way that like anxiety was reverberating through individuals and in the news, like, and the small details of like, people stocking, like buying like huge amounts of toilet paper, and that's those kinds of details, or stores running out of face masks. Like, I think that's a detail. I actually put a line like that in the Dreamers. So there were just like some eerie parallels like that. Although the more I thought about it, the more I started to feel like, well, it's just kind of that's just this kind of way that studying history makes it easier to predict how something would unfold in the future. So as part of figuring out how to write the Dreamers and how to handle the kind of how this outbreak would unfold, I did a lot of research about like 1918 influenza. So in a way, I was drawing on, like, even though there's some things in my book that feel like I could have, as if they sort of predicted small parts of this, what happened to us. I think it's really in the same way that like things that happened in 1918 actually like happened again in 2020, sadly. But anyway, it was strange. It was strange to feel like the space that I'd spent this imaginary territory, I mean, the imaginary time, then became our reality in some ways. I think one big difference, though, I noticed right away is that we I think you described it as a pandemic in the Dreamers, but actually technically what makes something a pandemic is when it spreads to the whole world, to a certain number of countries. But and the thing is, in the Dreamers, I specifically decided not as a writer, I was like, I don't know, it seems too overwhelming and complicated to try to track and manage this fictional disease through the entire world. So I really wanted to be like focused on this one little town that gets struck. And so then after the fact, I spent time thinking about how it's sort of the same. It's like, as a writer, I was like, oh, that is too complicated to figure out. I wanted to just stay in this one town. And it's funny how that's sort of, not funny, but it's ironic that it sort of parallels. Obviously, it would have been wonderful if coronavirus also had been able to stay in some small limited place. So in a way, once it really became a real pandemic, it sort of felt further away from the quaint, in a way, version that I had imagined.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Bree, I can imagine you have a lot of people who responded to the pandemic, maybe quarantining like I did, which is first thing I did was went to my independent bookstore and bought some books. I mean, I did that before I did groceries. So I imagine you have customers who are similar, and I'm wondering what you have seen in terms of trends over these past couple months about books people are buying. What's been popular in the store?
Well, back in March, a lot of the books that first started going out the door were books about how to teach your kids at home, workbooks. Definitely, schools were not prepared to go to virtual learning so quickly, and so people were supplementing a lot with workbooks. So that was the first section that cleared, I think. Then we started to see some books about sort of previous pandemics go out the door. I think there's a book called The Great Influenza, was really popular. Then we started to see books like Station 11. Is that the right one? Emily C. John Mandel's book, which I personally loved, and is exactly what everyone was thinking in the bookseller world when this started happening. And so at first it was a lot of sort of more how do I survive this type thing. So many books about baking bread, so many books about being home alone or fixing your life, lots of self-help stuff. But then by late May, Portland has been very, very involved and is still protesting even now with the racial justice protests. And so we still continue to see that product move. And, through May and June, it was a lot of books like, So You Want to Talk About Race, the anti-racist books, things like that. People are really trying to learn more about racism and systemic racism and embedded racism. And so it's sort of been this wave of like, let's teach our kids and bake bread, then let's talk about racism. And now we're still
kids about racism.
Yeah, teach our kids about racism, lots of stuff like that still happening. So we're still seeing those books in waves. Now things have started to stabilize a little bit. I don't want to say normalize. We've really been talking about stabilizing here at the store lately, where we're seeing folks return back to like typical front list buying and backlist buying of stuff that's popular. So, you know, our picks of the season are out, and those tend to be things that would have been published around now anyways. And then, of course, the Obama book just came out this week, and so that's really popular. So we're kind of stabilizing back to a place where people are following the trends from front list of newly published books, what's coming out, but still a lot of people looking for answers, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, when you're at home alone or with a partner or a family, and you start to see things in a different way, and now they're looking for answers about what they see and what they experience.
Yeah. I'll admit that I read Station 11 during the pandemic. I guess I feel a little bit more prepared that I could survive an apocalypse, but that's an extraordinary book. But yeah, it's interesting. We've talked to a lot of booksellers, and they all trend the same way. You know, they started off with maybe these how-to books, or a lot of people would talk about how the beginning of the pandemic, they had a lot of people buying things like Middlemarch, you know, or Moby Dick, like they were finally going to read a classic. And then things changed over to books about systemic racism. And then things switched to like romance novels or sci-fi, that people kind of needed a break. We've seen this kind of flow that's happened across the country.
Yes.
But the good thing is
returning to their comfort.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Karen, what about you? What have you read this year during this? I want to say during the pandemic, but it's basically like the entire year. But unfortunately, was there anything that you've read that you have found to be extraordinary, or just brought you joy, or you want people to, that was so good that you want people to pay attention to?
Yeah, I feel like there's two books that really stood out to me. I mean, one is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue, which is about, it's set in a maternity ward in Dublin in 1918 during the influenza, in October of 1918, during the influenza pandemic. So that was really, I just raced through it. I think I read it in like 2 sittings, and I just found it really, just really riveting, and a really interesting take on, even though, so it's set during the influenza, and it's very much about that, but it's also, because she set it in this maternity ward, it's just so much about women. It's about like the lives of women, and especially at that time, but obviously you can feel some of it continues, just the ways that like women's bodies are, you know, like affect the course of their lives, and how even more then. So each character who's in there, you know, there's like, you meet all these pregnant women who also have the flu. That's part of it. Pregnant women who have they're in the influenza, like I think it's like fever / maternity ward. Anyway, it's very riveting and very like intense, and just a really beautiful story about like relationships between women and the lives of women. So that was a great one. And also, I think the fact that I read it during our own sort of similarly, hopefully rare pandemic situation, it felt really like something about touching that time period again was really powerful. And then another one that I read, it's not as new, but this is the year that I read it, is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. And that was just, I mean, it's good for so many reasons, but I feel like I just found it so absorbing and moving, and all at the same time thought-provoking. And it was just interesting to read this like imaginative take on American history, and African American history, where I was at once like being reminded of some of the terrible things that have happened in our past, but also with this like imaginative take. It was just interesting to read that, maybe especially. I mean, I think I read it in maybe May or June. It felt like right around the time that racial justice protests were really like beginning, and there was just something about reading that again, maybe again, like touching that these earlier historic times, and being reminded of how they are continue to interact with like the problems that we have now. But it's also just a really, beautifully written, and I love the characters. His handling of characters is just really, really great. So I feel like those are the two that have meant the most to me since the pandemic. And I do also in general feel a little like it's been hard to connect easily with every novel in this time. So maybe I need like the really intense, both of those books are pretty intense. And I feel like there's something about that feels like the right tone while we're living through an intense moment.
Maybe it balances out the intensity of reality with the intensity of imagination.
Yeah, I don't know.
Bree, what about you? What have you personally read? You shared with us what your customers are reading, but was there anything that you have read that you found particularly terrific that you want to share?
Well, I definitely would recommend Ali Broch's book, which is sort of a graphic novel narrative. It's called Solutions and Other Problems. Her first book was Hyperbole and a Half.
Okay.
And it's just really hilarious, but it also touches on aspects of mental health. And it's just something that will bring you comfort and you can kind of get lost in. So something like that, I love that and would recommend that to anyone really. But I also have found comfort in reading books that are sort of similarly that idea of a dystopian or magical realism aspect of like what we're experiencing right now. So Karen Russell's book, Sleep Donation, is about people who are able to donate their sleep to insomniacs. And then what happens when that starts to be controlled in sort of a capitalistic way and the fallout from that. It's really good. I would definitely recommend it. And it's a shorter read. So I know folks are having a really hard time staying focused on books for any period of time. I myself will start something and end it 3 months later because it's just like focusing is a problem. So graphic novels and shorter novels right now, I highly recommend to anyone who's struggling to finish a book. Because I think when we don't finish books, we don't get that sense of accomplishment that makes us want to read more. But so many readers and writers have been commenting about how hard it is to read. And then there's this other book out right now that I would recommend. I think it's called The Remarkable Life of Addie LaRue. It's by V.E. Schwab. And it's about it's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. It's about a person who sort of makes a deal with a devil-like figure to have immortality. But part of the consequences of that is that no one that they meet will ever remember them. And so they move through life in sort of a very lonely way. And then eventually, like, I think 300 years later, they meet somebody who remembers them. And so it's really just this book that's kind of spooky and dark, but also you feel like right now in this pandemic we're in a spooky, dark place, but it's also really hopeful too. And so I think those are the themes that folks are looking for in the books they're reading right now.
Great. Thank you. We're getting audience comments and questions, and a lot of people are excited for your next book, Karen.
Oh, that's nice.
I know that's like sometimes it's nice to hear, and also probably not.
No, it's great. It's great to hear. It's great to just have readers at all. Thank you.
Yes, excited, and the specific question, another question related to that is, what do you recommend to readers who loved your work? So while they're waiting for your third book, who should they read?
Wow, that's an interesting way to think about it. I mean,
We're assuming they've read both of your books already.
Yeah, it's hard for me to like go that deep in what it's like to be a reader of my own books to then, but I think maybe a relevant answer would be like the books that I have loved and that influenced my writing. So if you haven't already read Blindness by Jose Saramago, I really recommend that one. It's about like a sudden outbreak of a mysterious blindness. So it's like everyone goes blind in a city. And that one, it's very dark. It's darker than my books, but it's really good and really does a good job of like taking this like kind of thrilling story, but bringing you on this like philosophical journey also. So that one, it's been a big influence for me for both of my books. So that's Blindness by Jose Saramago. Another one of my favorites is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I just saw this morning, Bree probably already knows about this, that he has a new novel coming in the spring, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
But I don't know a lot about that one yet. But yeah, those are probably the ones that like, yeah, have meant the most to me. And that maybe have something in common with my work. Maybe Never Let Me Go in particular is like the fact that Ishiguro puts so much attention and interest on like the small moments between young people and like just the relationship dynamics. But then there is this like bigger, scary premise that's interacting with that. I think that's the part that feels like sort of it has something in common, or I aspire to do something similar to what he does in my books.
Great. Those are good recommendations. Having read that book and your books, I can see that connection. So one of the things that we've lost during this time of pandemic is the ability to gather in person to celebrate authors and books. And I know that Powell's has been doing some online events. And Bree, you mentioned that you've been flat out busy with that for a while and that you're mostly taking a little bit of a break over the holidays, but people should still go to powells.com to find out about your upcoming events, get on your mailing list. I'm curious, when you have this space now to think back on all the events that you've been a part of, have you had any that were just like the most memorable? We had a bookseller one time talk about an author who like took off her clothes in the middle of a talk. We've heard a lot of crazy stories, but has there been a talk, an author event that was like, this was the most memorable that you'd want people to know about?
From in store or virtual or both?
Oh, whatever. If you had memorable virtual events in person.
We hosted, now I think it might have been last year when I say this, but we hosted Chris Ware and Linda Berry for an event. They both had different books out. Chris Ware is a graphic novelist, and then Linda Berry writes a lot of books about creativity and capturing that in your own work. And it was just such a fascinating talk listening to both of them. So that's definitely a memorable in-store event. Online this fall, we've had some really great events with Lindy West and Roxane Gay. We also hosted this event, and it's gonna blank right now. I think her name was Catherine Sullivan. Very sorry that I'm forgetting that. But she wrote a book about a women's Air Force group that worked in World War II, and she brought one of the women pilots on to the interview. And this woman lives in Arizona, and she's 90, and just listening to the two of them talk about their experience, real life experience, and then the book itself. So I think any moment at any of the author events in the past year and all the years where you got to learn more about the process and you really connected with that person and their passion for whatever their event was. Those are honestly our best events that we ever have, and like getting to see people meet Bruce Springsteen or meet Jimmy Carter, like even big events on that scale. Like the best part of being a bookseller and working at Powell's Books is just seeing people meet the people that they love, and getting the chance to thank that person or listen to that person in a new way. And so not being able to host events in the store has been probably one of the sadder parts about being closed.
Yeah. Karen, have you ever had an author event at Powell's?
Yeah, I've done events there for both of my books. So the first time for The Age of Miracles, that would have been 2012. And I had not spent very much time in Portland yet at that point, but I was at the both of them were at the City of Books location, and I was blown away. I remember getting to have an event there for my first book, and then recently last year I had an event there where Karen Russell interviewed me for my book, and that was really great and felt like sort of I don't know. I remember thinking that night felt like Portland. It was the night that I felt the most like Portland is really my home, because I moved here in 2017. So that was like a year and a half later where I was like, yes, I've always loved it, but there's that transition time where you still feel sort of like a visitor, but something about having the event there. And Karen and I actually went to graduate school together, so we have been friends for a long time. So anyway, to have her, and she's like such a Portland author, like, and interviewing me and knowing some of the people in the audience from around town, like that felt really special in that sense, which was different than the first time. But I always feel really lucky and glad to have an event at Powell's.
And you've also done a different kind of event. You gave a TED Talk that's been viewed over 2.5 million times. And we're going to put the link below. So if people haven't had the opportunity to watch it, I think it's a great talk. And if you're a writer, you should especially watch it. And you gave this talk about, and I hope I do it justice, talked about the sort of intersection of fear and imagination. Mm-hmm. With references to Moby Dick and many other classics. And I'm really curious what you think about like how that thought for you about the intersection of fear and imagination holds now that you're living in the middle of a pandemic. We can talk about all these books that have been written about pandemics that happen, sci-fi books and speculative fiction, but then to be living in one is just a very different experience. And I think you said something earlier I thought was perfectly encapsulates it. Like, we're having this pandemic and it affects us on this global scale, but then we all have to just get through the day too. We have to figure out how to get toilet paper and how to get our kids to school and how to get groceries, and sort of the very basic functions of our lives are also impacted, right? So I'm just curious, do you think it's true what you said then? Is it still applicable now that you've had this experience?
Yeah, I have thought about it some. So yeah, the TED Talk is about this idea of like that fear. It's not my idea exactly, but it's just a true thing that fear is in a way an act of the imagination. Like, so that when you have a fear, it's sort of like your brain sort of subconsciously or unconsciously telling you an instant story. Like you see like your child too close to the road, and you see a story like they're about to get hit by the car. You see them get hit by the car in a way, and you pull them back. So anyway, I was interested in how like fear activates the imagination, and that so that's part of it. But then another big part of it, and this is the part that I've thought of some during the pandemic, is this idea that like fears can be really useful. Like, it's a way of helping us predict the future and maybe make adjustments to try to be safer. But the key is like figuring out which kinds of fears are the ones to listen to. So sometimes like if you listen to irrational fears, then that's not useful and could take over your life. But if the sort of the right kind of fear could be just really have a lot of wisdom in it, and this insight that in a way some part of your brain is sort of sending to the conscious part of your brain. So I have thought about it related to the pandemic. It's hard because the pandemic, it's so big and so new that I think it's a little harder to like, I think it's really important for us all to be both listening to our fears and like interrogating them. Like, we don't want to be too quick, like, you don't want to like be too quick to like listen to any scary possibility, but at the same time, you can't ignore your fears. Like, what's going to happen if I, like do something that doesn't fit with the what we've learned about how to be safe from coronavirus. So like being afraid of not wearing a mask when you're close to other people, that's a fear. Like you should listen to that, wear the mask, But then I don't know if you're not in a high risk group, should you like barricade yourself in your bedroom and never leave the house for a year? Like maybe that's probably the irrational version. I don't know. But I do feel like something that's different from the examples I used in my TED Talk is that it's like a new thing. So it's evolving all the time and the science is evolving all the time. So I found it a little harder to manage, where like the example I use in my TED Talk, like one is like, now I can't remember what I said about air travel, but like, let's say you're afraid of air travel. You can then look at decades of research and see that, like, of course, there is a tiny chance that something could go wrong, but it's really actually much less likely that something will happen to you on an airplane than if you're driving. And so I get a lot of like comfort from scientific evidence like that. And I think what's hard about the coronavirus is that it's new. And so it's changing all the time. So there isn't that same depth. There isn't that same feeling of like, oh, I feel afraid of a certain possibility. I'm going to look up what the vast years of all of science has discovered, and then I'll decide what makes sense. Like instead we have only preliminary science. And so I still find myself doing that, where I feel nervous about something and I look it up. Like my daughter has asthma. And so at the beginning it seemed like, oh, that sounds like it could make getting coronavirus worse. But I keep checking the studies. They keep doing studies and finding that maybe for reasons they don't totally understand, it's actually not, in this case, a big risk factor. So that's an example of where I'm like holding on to that evidence and trying to like let her, while being safe, I don't want to shut down her life totally, over that. But it's hard because it's still like, the other night I was looking it up again. I was like, but really, is she more at risk than other children? So anyway, I think that's the big difference, that it's new. I think that's different than like other kinds of fears in our lives.
Definitely worth checking out Karen's TED Talk. Again, we'll put the link below. And we're coming to the end of our time. So I wanted to just, before we signed off, Karen, is there anything you wanted us to know about Powell's? What makes it so special to you, for our viewers? Bree, anything you wanted to highlight about the store that we haven't already mentioned?
You go first.
I just love it as a part of Portland, and it's just the fact that it has thrived for so long in Portland also just gives me a good feeling like the people of Portland care about books and reading, and that's something that's sort of like, maybe I feel like Portland isn't. Powell's is this nice like physical like proof and monument to that, which I love.
Yeah, Portland is such a book town, and we are at our best when the other independent bookstores in our town and even in our state and country are also at their best. And so I think it's not just about supporting Powell's Books, but supporting any independent bookstore at this time. And the reason that we have been able to stay in business is because of all these folks who want to come here and want to see this business. And we are really hoping that that means in 2021, if things stabilize more, we can welcome more people back into the store and just continue on. Next year is our 50th anniversary, and we're just really grateful to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for being with us today on Authors Love Bookstores. It was a real pleasure to talk with both of you and to hear about Powell's, talk writing, talk book selling. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here, book lovers. We appreciate you supporting our work and the work of independent bookstores and authors. Please be sure to check out Powell's online at powells.com. Even if you don't live in Portland, you can support the store. Holidays are coming, and the best thing to give at the holidays are books. That's my honest opinion. That's what everyone in my family is getting. So powells.com. Also, you can follow Karen on social media to find out her upcoming author talks and to find out when her book is done. And please join us back here in 2 weeks. We're taking Thanksgiving off for another edition of Authors Love Bookstores. Until then, be well and keep reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.